The blast was visible for miles, a black column climbing 100 meters into the sky. 660,000 liters of fuel consumed in an instant. What set this strike apart wasn't the fireball itself, but the reach. That Russian train was 35 kilometers inside enemy-held territory, supposedly shielded by layers of defenses. 4 Ukrainian pilots were about to demonstrate that no rear area asset was untouchable, and they'd do it with drones cheaper than a laptop. 35 kilometers out, operators from Ukraine's elite Ronin unit squinted at degraded video feeds piped through analog links that should have failed long ago. 4 FPV quadcopters were pushing ranges doctrine calls impossible. Conventional consumer rigs fail around 3 kilometers. These were already at 15 and still climbing. Kabul 9 fed live intelligence updates while Alpha unit intercepted chatter. A separate counter-jamming team stood ready to punch through Russian electronic interference, on cue. Then, without warning, the operator's screen collapsed into snow. The attack drone had gone blind. Their critical repeater, the relay that made a 35-kilometer run feasible, had been taken out. A Verba Manpads operator scored a direct hit on the repeater hovering at 500 meters. With that node destroyed, command passed to seconds, and the mission teetered on the edge of failure. Extreme-range FPV ops are unforgiving. Ukraine uses analog 5.88 GHz video because latency is 0. Digital links introduce 200 ms lag, which at 80 km/h equates to a 5 mm miss. The trade-off is vulnerability. The chain needs airborne repeaters every 5 km. The Ronin pilot watched the countdown. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Then the backup repeater bridged the gap. It had been flying low at about 200 meters, harder for Verba to spot, though not perfectly positioned, and the signal sagged to roughly 60% strength. Grainy video returned, but it was enough. That single patchwork link now stretched all the way toward a Russian fuel train carrying 660,000 liters of diesel and aviation fuel. The mission wasn't a solo run, it was 4 specialized groups acting in concert. Kabul 9 had trailed this train for weeks, cataloging schedules and fuel car layouts. Alpha monitored Russian emissions for signs of detection. The state special communications team stood poised with counter-EW gear. Ronin flew the strike drones. Kabul 9 supplied targeting updates. Alpha would punch holes through jamming as required. The repeater redundancy was deliberate doctrine. Ukrainian chains typically run 3 repeaters with 2 backups at staggered altitudes, the primary at 500 mm for range, a 200 mm backup harder to detect but with reduced propagation, and a 100 mm skimmer for last resort survival. They spaced them 5 kilometers apart to avoid single-shot losses. Ronin crews log hundreds of simulator hours practicing degraded signal flight, using rivers, rails, and power corridors as mental waypoints. They train to fly blind for up to 30 seconds, count to 15, slight right to stay on the tracks, count 10, climb for the power lines. These mantras keep the bees flying when electronics die. The Russians always suspected drone attacks. The question was whether layered defenses could stop them. The fuel train rolled on at 40 km/h, oblivious to 4 FPV attackers converging from miles away. The lead drone had 20 kilometers remaining. What followed would decide if Ukraine's gamble paid off or if 4 drones would be lost for nothing. As the leader pushed deeper, at roughly the 25-kilometer mark it entered an electromagnetic storm. Video didn't merely degrade, it dissolved into chaos. Random pixels, rolling snow, then nothing. The repeater had been hit, the Verba operator's work was done. The drone had wandered into the engagement bubble of the R330 Zaj. This truck-mounted R330 Zaj can blanket 100 to 2,000 Hz with jamming, carving out a 15 km denial zone where signals vanish. The Ronin pilot immediately invoked aggressive frequency hopping, 40 hops per second, hunting for microgaps. The R330 Zaj is potent, but not omnipotent. It can't saturate every band at full power. There are tiny millisecond slices the jammer misses. Ukrainian teams had mapped those patterns from previous missions. Their hopping routine was a practice choreography. 3 hops on common bands to confuse, then a quick jump to a gap for 2 seconds of clean audio, then repeat. They'd tuned that dance through bitter trial and error. For 15 gut-clenching seconds the drone raced blind. GPS reported positions that were kilometers off. The Russians were spoofing satellite signals too. Ronin pilots rely on drilled instincts, counting seconds, sun angle, rail lines. Behind the leader, 3 more FPV rigs trailed at 30-second intervals. That spacing mattered. Too close and a single jamming burst catches them all. Too far and the leader's successful pattern won't help the followers. 30 seconds let each drone piggyback on the leader's timing, while the Russians recalibrated. Then the Ukrainians triggered their counter-EW hammer, a directional high-power transmission intended to burn a temporary hole through the jamming. It's not stealthy. For 30 seconds their location flares on every Russian sensor, but they'd calculated risk versus gain. Russian artillery response averaged 245 seconds from cue to first round, so a 30-second window of clarity could push the drones through the most hostile corridor. Operators watched the clock. At 28 seconds they cut transmission and relocated, preserving a 17-second safety margin. Prior missions validated this timing. Brutal, aggressive, but survivable. The feed returned, fuzzy but usable. The drone followed the rails at 50 meters altitude, using them like an analog highway that GPS spoofing can't erase. Next jammer in the sequence was the Kasuka 4, which now had a fix on the control signals from far out. The Russian operator cued a Pantsir S-1 for intercept. The Pantsir locked the lead, 8 seconds to missile launch. But Ukraine had prepared decoys. Cheap $200 corner reflector drones blinked onto Russian scopes as large signatures, and suddenly half a dozen spurious tracks cluttered the display. The Pantsir's fire control couldn't discriminate radar returns from inexpensive reflectors and real threats. The operator faced a choice: expend interceptors on clutter or risk letting an actual munition slip through. He chose to fire. Missiles leapt skyward, but only 4 of 6 decoys had activated correctly. 2 true attack drones remained exposed. Even so, 4 decoys were enough. These garage-built distractions, parts scavenged from racing frames and energy drink cans, forced the Pantsir to burn 8 missiles on throwaway targets. Missile magazines emptied fast. Reloads take approximately 20 minutes. The Pantsir still had 30mm autocannons, but terrain masking saved the day. The real attack drones dropped to 10 meters, skimming grass. Pantsir's mine altitude is postward 15 meters, below which its radars struggle to separate targets from ground clutter. The drones threaded a razor's edge between being high enough to hit and low enough to be ignored. Flying at grass level means dodging hazards constantly. Power lines, sudden treetops, and birds at 80 km/h. Ronin pilots memorize every obstacle from satellite imagery, the exact point to kick up 3 meters for a crossing, the bank to avoid a radio mast at km 29. The Kasuka 4 could detect analog video but struggled to null it. Analog degrades gracefully. Even at 80% interference you still get, choose 20% picture. Digital would be utterly blacked out, but digital latency kills terminal precision. 4 kilometers from the target, the train received a warning. The engineer tried to accelerate. A moving 40 km/h target is far harder to strike than a stationary one. Hit probability falls from 90% to 30%, but the Ukrainians had planned for that. Through static, the operator tracked the locomotive smoke and counted cars. The lead drone closed at 80 km/h. The next 2 minutes would end with either burning UAVs or a burning train. 2 kilometers out, the defenders activated the Pole 21 jammer mounted on the train itself. Its bubble scrambled nav, GPS dropped, GLONASS reeked false positions, even compasses cavorted. Yet the analog video, grainy and haunted, still bled through. The attackers were now flying on visual reference over a screen that resembled an old TV with terrible reception, using rails as a guide. The locomotive pushed to 45 km/h. The operator counted tankers passed in the snow. 7, 6, 5. The priority was the third car behind the loco. Hit that, and fuel would cascade into the rest. At 500 Nalarim, the picture began to die again. Pole 21 was winning. The Ronin pilots flew on memory and instinct. 3 seconds to impact. 2, 1. At 10:32 a.m., the lead drone struck the lead fuel tanker. Its RPG-7 style warhead, a shaped charge, punched through the shell, molten copper tearing into 60,000 liters of diesel. The blast was immediate, catastrophic. Emergency brakes engaged automatically. The whole convoy screeched to a halt. 30 seconds later, the second drone dove through choking smoke and hit the fourth car, ensuring the blaze would propagate. The third pilot faced a wall of thermal interference. Cameras saturated to white, but they'd studied the train configuration and used timing to find the seventh car. Emerging through smoke, the drone found its mark within 50 meters, 1 second to tweak, then detonated. The fourth drone had the hardest run, The train was an inferno, flames towering 100 meters. One rear tanker still sat intact. Leaving it meant leaving salvageable fuel. The pilot pushed through the black column, counted down his last visual cues, 3, 2, 1, and struck. At 10:19 and 10:30 seconds, as logged, the final fuel car detonated. 11 tankers burned, all 660,000 liters were lost. The blaze raged for roughly 6 hours, warping rails, cracking concrete sleepers. The line would be out of service for at least 72 hours. 4 drones costing around $12,000 total had destroyed millions of dollars in fuel and infrastructure. The strategic effect was blunt. Nowhere in occupied rear areas was guaranteed safe. If Ronin could reach 35 kilometers today, tomorrow might be 50, next week, 100. No train, depot, or bridge is immune. Ukraine has thousands more drones ready. Bye for now.